everyone. My name is Claudia, and I'm with Time for Stamping. Today I wanted to show you a couple of cards that I've made with the new Amber Autumn set. I love this set. The images are so beautiful and can be colored so many different ways. Today I've used both watercolor and Stampin'Blends to color my images. I've also used just early espresso ink to stamp the image, as well as Versamark and gold embossing powder to stamp the image. So today I'm going to mostly be working with this. It does come with a die set. The die set cuts out the images as well as some extra little embellishments and this lovely background die that is all kinds of autumn leaves that you can have fun with. Today I'm going to concentrate on the two images, but I also wanted to show you that I'm going to be using one of the dies from this set, which is also a new set called Branching Out. And I love the dies with it because you get lots of pretty stitched label dies with it, as well as these really cute little berry kind of embellishments and a darling little pine cone. So let me put this aside for a moment and we'll get started on the card. Now I put this card up on one of the crafting sites and immediately got about 100 likes and responses for it, so I thought I would do this one first. As you can see, the gold embossing on there, and then I'm simply going to watercolor it. So I'll show you how I did that. Okay, first of all, let's make the card base real quick. Now I've used pumpkin pie cardstock. This is 8.5 by 5.5, and it's scored at 4 1/4. It's your basic A2 size card. And then for my first layer, I have Cajun Craze, which is 5 3/8 by 4 1/8. Now I made a layer of this for both the inside and the front of the card. So let's do the front of the card first. And as you can see, it leaves just enough of a pretty pumpkin pie border around there. Okay, and my second layer is going to be a piece of the designer paper, the Autumn Toile designer paper. Has this on one side, which is also a very pretty pattern, but I'm choosing to use this because we are using the leaves and making this kind of a nice autumn leaf kind of card. Okay, now some of you use snail or seal, whichever adhesive runner you prefer. I like to use glue. I used to be an avid adhesive runner person, and then I switched to glue, and I really like using glue because if you make a mistake, you can kind of, you have a couple minutes there, maybe 30 seconds or so to readjust it if you need to make that a little bit straighter. So there's my card front as it is, and then we're going to add some of these beautiful leaves to it. Now, I'm using basic beige to stamp my image. And of course, this is with Versamark, so you're really not going to see when I stamp it, because it's a clear, sticky ink. So I'm just going to put that right there. And if you can see it at all, it just looks kind of like a watermark, but I don't think the camera's going to pick that up. So here's my gold embossing powder. I'm going to put that on. And now you can see the beautiful image. Okay. So next thing I need to do is heat that up with my heat tool and melt that embossing powder. So this is going to be noisy for a minute. Now, two questions that I often get asked: can I use my hair dryer? No, you cannot use your hair dryer. The hair dryer is not hot enough. The second one is, how do you know when you've done it enough? And how you know that is your image will become shiny. Okay, if you have any dullness to it, just go over it and make sure that all that powder is melted. Also, when you're using your heat tool, you don't want to just hold it in one spot. You want to keep slowly moving it around about an inch or so from the paper. If you hold it in one spot, you risk burning your paper. Okay, it's very hot, so you also want to keep your fingers out of the way. All right, so now I'm going to watercolor this. I'm just going to cut this apart here a little bit, get rid of some of this excess. Now I'm using one of Stampin' Up's water painters to color this with ink. I don't believe we have any water markers left. I believe they discontinued those. So in that case, if you don't have one, you can always use just a paintbrush and water. All right, so as you can see, we have, I'm going to bring you a little bit closer, the acorns and the leaves and a little bit of the stem to color. So I'm going to do the acorns first. And for that, I'm using crumb cake. Now this is water-based dye, ink I should say, water-based ink. So I'm just going to pick up some of this color and simply put that on the base of the acorns. Now you want to make sure that you have water coming out of this, but you don't want it dripping wet. And if you're using a paintbrush and water, same thing. You don't want it dripping, you just want your paintbrush damp so that you can pick up the color. Now as you put the color on, if you want to add a little bit more, you can see where these kind of highlight marks are with the gold. You can just go ahead, pick up more ink and kind of go over just that portion. And that'll give you kind of more of a shadowy look to it. Okay, as you can see there. All right, and for the caps of my acorns, I almost said mushrooms, I'm using pecan pie. Same thing, just picking up some ink, cleaning off my brush of the crumb cake, picking up a little bit of this ink, and putting it on the caps of the acorns. Now there's a lot of gold in these caps, since I've used gold, or if you were using this with an ink, you would have a lot of ink color markings on there. I like using this with the gold embossing powder because it really, really adds a little bit of elegance to it, as you can see there. Okay, and I'm also going to color the stem. Now for this stem, I'm trying to pick up a little bit more of the color and making the stem a bit darker than what I did with the acorn caps. And it's just a little tiny bit you need here for the stem. Okay, so for the card, you need 3 of these. I'm just going to color one for you. I've already pre-colored 2 and cut them out, but I just wanted to show you how I colored these. So for my first layer of the leaves, what I'm using is crushed curry. And again, you want to make sure your brush is clear. Now, generally, you would use watercolor paper. This is just plain cardstock. This is the basic beige cardstock. So you don't want to put too much water on this. You don't want your paper to degrade. But on the other hand, you want it wet enough that things are going to blend nicely. So I'm probably using a little bit more water than I normally would if I was just painting 1 or 2 colors. But I'm painting the whole leaf here with crushed curry. Actually, there's 2 leaves, so I'm painting them both with crushed curry and a little bit of water. And since this is, we're dealing with nature here, a nature image, and of course, if you know oak leaves at all, which these are, when they turn colors in the fall, they're very colorful. They show lots of color in them. So my base color for that is crushed curry. Then I'm going to add just a little bit of pumpkin pie ink to this. And again, just kind of let that blend in. And it doesn't have to be exact. As I said, this is nature, so things are kind of freeform. But I'm just adding a little bit of the orange color to these and keeping the undertone of the crushed curry. Okay, my next color I'm using is Cajun Craze. Again, the same thing. We're just going to add some Cajun Craze to this, and this will be a little bit darker orange or rust color that we're adding to the leaves. Just bring that out and blend it. You want to get your tips a little more, you can do that. Fall is my favorite time of year. I love the colors, I love the cooler temperatures. I love the shorter days and longer nights, the coziness of it. Apple cider, bringing out the hot chocolate. Okay, one final color, and that would be cherry cobbler. We're going to add just a touch of the cherry cobbler. Now my neighbor has an oak tree, and her leaves turn this darker shade of red. So this is a tribute to her tree. Just adding a few strokes of the red to this. This is cherry cobbler, so it's the deeper red that we have. And again, you can see how nicely this blends when you have it just a little bit wet. Okay, and as I said, you don't want it too wet because you don't want your paper to degrade. So there we have those pretty leaves. Aren't those beautiful? Okay, so this is still a little bit wet. I'm just going to use my heat tool to dry this up. Okay, and then I can go ahead and cut that out with this image. Okay, so I don't want this to move around. So once I get it set, I'm going to put a Post-it note over it. And what you want to do is make sure you have the sticky part here a little bit over the die and a little bit over the paper, so that it holds it in place exactly where you want it. Okay, well, let me cut this out. Okay, so there we have that pretty image cut out. And as I said, I had two that I already made. So we're going to use these 3 on the card base. Before I put those on, I want to put my Autumn Wishes greeting on there. So for that, I'm using Early Espresso ink. And this sentiment here, this greeting, is from the Amber Autumn set. So I'm just going to put that about like that. This is just a scrap of Very Vanilla. And to cut this out, I'm going to use one of these dies that is in the Textured Notes set. I love this set because look at all the beautiful rectangles and the embossing that you have around each of the rectangles. So for this one, I'm using this size. It fits that very nicely. And I want to put it not in the center. I want to put this over to the right as far as I can. Have the words on the right side like that, because the leaves are going to partially cover this little label. So let me cut this out. Okay, so you can see how that looks like that. All right, so I'm going to put this about in the middle of the card, but way over towards the right side. And this is just going to be glued down. Or if you're using adhesive runner, of course, you would be using your adhesive runner. So that's going to go not quite to the edge, but in the center over to the right like that. Okay. Now we can start arranging these images. You can arrange these any way you like. What I'm going to be doing here is putting the bottom two like this, flat on the card base with glue, and then the last one I'm going to raise up on dimensionals. So I want to make sure that I have these right where I want them. This one will be up on dimensionals. I don't want to cover up too much of the other images. So it's always a good idea to kind of pre-place where you think you might want them. Okay, we don't want to cover up the words. So we're going to put that right like that. And then we have this one, same thing, a little bit of glue. And you can see I'm going over the label here just a little bit, the greeting. But of course you don't want to cover your words up. And this last one we're going to put up on dimensionals. So I happen to be at the end of my dimensionals here, so I'm just going to snip off a few of these pieces and use them. Now this set, this Amber Autumn set, is one of the new sets that will be coming out in September. And of course, if you're a demonstrator, it's on a pre-order for you. Now this little stem, it's a very narrow little piece here, but I still like to put it up on just a little piece of a dimensional so that it doesn't get bent in the envelope when you're putting it in or taking it out. Try that again. Didn't have the backing off. There we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and take these backing pieces off. And then we can go ahead and layer this on. Make sure you're not covering your words. And just overlapping the other images slightly, just to make it a nice, even design around your sentiment. Now the other thing I like to do here is add just a little bit of bling. Now these are our new streaked dots adhesive back embellishments. They're in 3 sizes, and I'm going to use the medium size for this and just put one of these right over here, just to kind of tie that together. Isn't that pretty? Okay, that's card number 1, the front. Now for the inside, I also have a little piece, another piece I should say, of Cajun Craze, 5 3/8 by 4 1/8. And a lot of people don't put an extra layer down on the inside. I like to do it because it kind of ties together the front of it like this. Now, if you want, you can stamp a greeting in here. So I am going to use one of the greetings, the sentiments, again from the Amber Autumn set. And this says, "Blessed to have you in my life." So I am just going to put that kind of above center a little bit. And then we'll go ahead and put that in. Now there's one more thing you can do if you want to add just a little bit more elegance to this in the Amber Autumn die set. As I mentioned before, there's a couple extra little dies that you can cut as embellishments. And one of them is this little, looks kind of like a little wheat stem. And I've cut it with gold. Now this, I'm actually going to put this on the inside of the card next to my sentiment to highlight that. And then I actually have another one for the front of the card. And you can tuck that under here and bring that, just that little bit of the top of it out. And cutting this with the gold foil also ties in nicely with the gold embossing powder that I used for the images. Okay, so there we have card number 1. And as I said, this is getting a lot of attention on the Facebook group that I put in on. So I'll be putting this on Pinterest, and I'm also going to be putting the dimensions that I used and the supplies I used on my blog, which is timeforstamping.com. And then 4 is the number 4. Okay, next one I want to make for you is this one, again using the Amber Autumn set. And this time we're going to use the pumpkin and gourd image as well as some of the extra designer paper. This is a very simple, fun fold to make. Nothing too fancy about it, but it looks very nice. Okay, so my base on this one is crumb cake. And this is 8.5 by 5.5, and you score it twice at 4 1/4, or yes, 4 1/4 and 2 1/8. And you're simply folding that over as if you were making a regular card, and then fold it back on the second score mark so that it's actually like a Z. Okay, this is also called a Z fold. So we want to make sure that these are nice and crisp folds. There we go. And for my first layer for these, again, I'm using Cajun Craze. And I have, on this one, I made the first layer just a little bit smaller. Rather than 5 3/8, I went with 5 1/4 by 4 inches. So this is my first layer, and it leaves a little bit larger layer around that. I'm sorry, actually I did use 5 3/8 by 4 1/8. I was looking at a different set of instructions here. And then I want to cover these 2 panels again with Cajun Craze, and these are 5 3/8 by, I believe it's 2 inches. Yes, 2 inches. So this is going to go on each of these smaller panels. One there, and you can see the nice little border of the crumb cake showing in there. And this one. And then we have some designer paper that is going to go over all 3 of these panels. Now this is the designer paper I'm using. I love it. It shows the image as well as some extra images. You can see the little leaves and acorns and the pumpkins, and it's just so fall looking and so pretty in person. Now the back of this looks like this. It's just an all over kind of basic beige pattern. I initially was going to put that there like that, but I really love this side of the paper. So I'm actually going to show off that pretty designer paper. And we're just putting that right here. And again, leaving a nice border of Cajun Craze around that. And then another one of those on the front panel. Now these are 5 1/4. This is by 4 inches, and this is by, let's see, 1 3/4 inch. So I'm putting this on the first panel. And then for the second panel, Now if you wanted to, you could use this side like that. I'm going to be a little bit different and have this side showing, just to be a little bit different, add a little contrast when you open the card. So it will look like this opened up. Okay, when it's closed, you'll see the front like that. You open it up and you have a little bit of contrast there. So I've cut a piece of Very Vanilla with, let's see, this is the dies from that Branching Out set. I've used the second smallest one to cut out 2 of these. One of these is going to go on the inside and one is going to go on the front. So let's put those aside for a minute and let's get to coloring the pumpkin. Okay, now for this one, I'm coloring with Stampin'Blends rather than watercoloring. So I've already pre-stamped and die cut this. I've stamped it with Early Espresso. And again, I put it on Basic Beige. I'm going to pull you in just a little bit closer so you can see how I'm coloring. And I'm going to be using several different colors to color this pretty image. So let's just get started very simply with the corn down here. And I'm using Dark Daffodil. Now this is very easy to do. I'm using the pen end. If you've never worked with blends before, there are 2 ends to color with. One is a pen end and one is like a brush end like that. Okay, so for the smaller areas, I generally use the pen end. It's a little bit firmer and a little easier to control. So I'm simply just coloring the corn with the crushed curry. And for the little stalks or the little covers of the, I guess the husks is the term, I'm using crumb cake, both light and dark. So I'm going to start with light, the light shade of crumb cake. Now if they're still growing on the stalk in July, they're green. But once they're kind of opened and spent, they turn this pretty shade of tan. So I colored initially with the light shade of crumb cake, and I'm just adding a few little highlights with the darker shade, giving it a little personality there. And if you wanted to, you could go back over it with the light shade and blend that a little bit. It tends to blend itself when it's such a small area like that. Okay, now for the leaves, I got a couple leaves here and one over here. I'm using Old Olive, and again I'm using both the light and the dark shades, and I'm going to use the pen end. So I'm starting with light Old Olive to color the leaf. And then I'm taking the darker shade, just kind of adding a little bit of color on the veins of the leaf, and then going back over with the light shade, kind of pulling that color out a little bit. Okay, same thing with these leaves over here. Coloring with light Old Olive, adding a touch of the dark shade, and then pulling that color out. So that's all we're doing for those. Okay, you can see how those look when they're shaded a little bit. Okay, now for the pumpkin stems, I simply used the dark shade of crumb cake. Now I have some pumpkins growing in my garden in my yard. I only actually have, I believe, only 2 that have made it to a stage where I can use them. The critters, the groundhogs and raccoons have gotten a hold of my garden this year big time. So let's just get that little vine in there as well. A little bit on this side, just a very light touch. Same with these little strands of wheat. Just to add a little color there. And if you want, again, you can use crumb cake and add a little color to that little patch of dirt under there. Okay, so let's get to the pumpkins. Now for this, I'm using, let's see, light and dark pumpkin pie. So for this, I am going to use the brush end of the marker. Okay, so I'm coloring this all with light pumpkin pie, going not quite to the edge of the image because it does tend to run just a little bit. So, first layer is light pumpkin pie. I'm going to bring this here just so you can see the difference, how that looks. Okay, so much different. My next layer that I'm putting on is the dark shade of pumpkin pie, and I'm going to go over mostly where all of these lines are, the highlight marks. So you can see how it's coming together, starting to look a little bit more like the other pumpkin. And you can just keep adding as much as you want to bring that color to where you want it, okay? Coming back with the light shade and blending those together. And that makes that light shade just a little bit darker, as you can see. So we're almost to the color here. Now for that, what I'm going to do is use Cajun Craze. And I'm using the darker shade of Cajun Craze. Again, just going on those highlight marks and bringing those up. Just a little flick here and there. And again, using your pumpkin, blending that color together. Now if you don't know, the Stampin'Blends are alcohol-based markers. So you can just keep playing and adding more and more layers. I'm going to put a little bit more of the dark pumpkin pie on there. Leave just a little bit of that lighter shade as like little highlight marks there. A little bit more Cajun Craze, bring that up. Okay, so there's pumpkin number one. You can see the lighter shades coming through kind of in the center of each of those little panels. So the same thing with this second pumpkin. I'm going to start by coloring the whole pumpkin with light pumpkin pie. Now I used to be one of those that used strictly the watercolor markers, which I still love to use, but if you haven't heard, Stampin' Up! Is discontinuing their water-based markers in favor of these alcohol-based markers. Now when I first started, I'll be honest with you, when I first started using the alcohol base, I didn't care for them because I was so used to the way that the watercolor markers worked. But once I started playing with these, I really do prefer these over the watercolor markers. I think they're much easier to blend. They're a bit expensive, but they do last quite a while. As you can see here, I'm adding my second layer, the layer of dark pumpkin pie. And then we'll put in the Cajun Craze. Now I like that this image has all these little highlight marks on it when you stamp it, so you can kind of let that be your guide when you're coloring. Okay, let's use the lighter shade and blend all that together. And I think I'll add just a little bit more of the dark pumpkin pie shade here. There we go. I kind of like the way that one looks. Okay, so there are my two pumpkins. And now we have the gourd to color. Now the gourd, I colored one on a different card one time with crushed curry and mossy meadow. Now for this one, again, I'm using light pumpkin pie to color the entire gourd. And then using a little bit of Old Olive. This is the lighter shade of Old Olive. And putting that on those highlight marks, kind of damping down the color a bit. Bringing in the pumpkin pie once again and blending that together. Now the other thing I have left to do here is the little stem on top of the pumpkin, or on the top of the gourd. So I'm going to use the dark crumb cake for that. And then I see another little patch of dirt over here that I'm adding some light pumpkin pie to that. Okay, so there we have that colored. Now we can start building the card. Okay, so what I want to do here is this is going to go on here about like that. Before I put that on, I have some of the new, this is called Irregular Weave Trim, and as you can see, it's kind of a irregular weave. I don't know how else to describe it. So I'm just folding that over and then snipping that. Let's even that up just a little bit. There we go. So if you kind of bend that, it's kind of like almost like it's out of jute. It's kind of a stiff feeling to it. And that is going to go up here like that. So I'm going to add just a little dot of glue here. Let's use my other one. Okay, I'm just going to put that like that. And then this is going to go on top, so that's going to help hold that down. Okay, now for this I am going to still put this on just glue rather than dimensionals. So as you can see, I don't want all of this glued on. We want to just put about that much on there. So on the back, you want to make sure that you're not putting glue on this portion of it so that it doesn't stick to your, doesn't glue your card shut. Okay, now this is going to go on the front, but before we do that, it's easiest to put your inside on first, because if you put this on the front and then you go like this and say, well, that looks pretty good, but when you close it, they're not lined up. So what you want to do is put this one on first. Before I do that, I'm going to stamp. Now, I'm using, again, the same die from the branching out dies, and it's kind of narrow, so unfortunately, my Autumn Wishes from the Amber Autumn set does not fit on it. So, I am actually going to use, it's the same sentiment, it says Autumn Wishes, but it's from a retired set called Fond of Autumn. And again, this is rather narrow, so I just need to stamp these words separately. And since this is out of photopolymer, as you can see, I just put it on the word autumn. I'm going to wash this off. And then I'm going to ink up just the part that says wishes. Now this is a very easy stamp to do this in. One, because it's clear, and two, because it's kind of large, so it's easy to just put your ink on there. If you have a smaller sentiment, sometimes what you do is just cover the words you don't want inked up with tape. Ink up the rest of the words, then pull your tape off and stamp. Okay, so there is my sentiment that I want inside, and I'm just going to glue that to the inside. Right in the middle, like that. And for this, again, when I put this on, I'm just going to put it on like that. So again, you don't want glue on this part, you only want it on the front, the left side, the left half there. So a little bit of glue there. Close that up. Match up your dies, your die shapes, so that they match perfectly. And then press down your glued side, okay? That way it's not glued there, so it opens up nicely. When it's closed, it covers up your sentiment, and yet it looks a little bit nicer not seeing that sticking out from the side here. Now the last thing I want to do for this is use another one of our new embellishments. This is called Cajun Craze and Gold adhesive back dots. So I'm just going to put a couple of these around. Let's put one of the small ones up here, and maybe a larger one, larger one here, and then I'm going to use a medium one over here. So that adds a little bit of bling, but yet keeps it in the same color family, so you're good to go. Okay, so there are my two cards for today, using again the Amber Autumn set, which will be available in September if you're not a demonstrator. If you are, you can pre-order this now. I hope you enjoyed these cards and the techniques of coloring, one with blends, one with watercolor and ink. I hope to be back here next Tuesday. Actually, I won't be here next Tuesday. It's the day after Labor Day. And I've got some things going on, so I will be back in a couple weeks with some more pretty fall cards for you, using some more new sets that we have. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you soon. Have a great couple weeks, everybody, and a happy Memorial Day, or Labor Day.